Stephen Mansfield, welcome back to the Homilist podcast.
It's great to be with you again. Thank you.
This is really great. Thanks for doing it, man. I'm excited. There was so much feedback. There was so many people who started messaging me like, yo, like we are changing our whole plan and approach to youth ministry. We strapped kids in a van and we locked them up and drove to Colorado and made them listen to the podcast. We found everything. We're reading them the book at night. I mean, they went bananas on it. They're like, I don't know what you can do, but get him back, have another conversation, but this time talk about this and this. I'm like, I'll ask them. All right. It's not, I don't get to just tell people, but I will ask them. So thank you very much. This is really cool.
My privilege, really.
This is really cool. So Levi just had read your book. Which one was it?
Well, I started out with In Search of God and Guinness, and I never read a book quite like that. It got me hooked, and then I read Mansfield's book, Manly Men, and that was like, wow. Like,
yeah.
That's great. I'm so glad.
Changing.
So
I'm so glad. Fantastic.
I read the whole book, and then I'm going to go back. And so football season's super stressful. Like, they control your life. And so I'm going to go back and at the end of every chapter, that's going to incorporate into my quiet time every week and really use that as a study guide. And then I'm looking forward to Lincoln, learn more about Lincoln. I'm kind of a history nerd, so.
Oh, that's great. Thanks for saying that. It means a lot to me.
Yeah. No, it's awesome. So
that's really cool. That's really cool. Well, here's one of the things that came rolling in to my world after our last conversation. A buddy of mine texted and he said, "Hey, we need to have a conversation with Stephen Mansfield specifically about masculinity, Jesus, current culture." Now, he would like the conversation to go a little deeper into some other things. I'm on the side of like, I don't want to put you in that spot. I don't know that I want to be in that spot just yet, having that conversation. So let's talk about some of this other stuff first, and we'll see how far we want to go.
Cool. Sounds
into
great.
Some of those other ones. So hey, here's my first question: as I'm thinking about what's going on in current culture and within the church. Not globally. I mean, you see some really great things happen in the church outside the United States and in the United States, but within the United States, you see a little bit of a crisis in there. And one of the things that occurs to me is it seems like we have lost our grip on men. What you typically see is women marching into church, and men about 6 feet behind, kind of shuffling their feet like, well, if I don't go, then, happy life. I mean, happy wife, happy life, this kind of deal. And that's what you typically see. Like, how did, I think I understand how that happened, how we lost the grip on some of that. But when specifically did that begin to happen? If you could talk about both of those, that'd be super interesting.
Sure. Well, historically, I think it happened in America. Let's just talk about the United States. There's a fantastic book called The Feminization of American Culture. It's by Anne, I believe her last name is Douglas.
Yeah.
And it's really, it's academic, but it's something you got to read. And she makes a case that I agree with, and that is when you get to the late 1800s and the frontier is starting to close, as they say, they've had the battles with the Indians, we've gotten all the way to California, the frontier's closed, so a young man's likely to be born and never have to fight for freedom, never have to fight against an enemy, never have to clear the land himself and so on. That happened at the same time as the rise of theological liberalism. What's interesting is that Anne is not a Christian. She's a Columbia University professor, but not that you can't be a Christian and be a Columbia University professor, but she's not coming from our perspective. But she makes the point that with the rise of theological liberalism, you moved away from biblical norms, biblical foundations, and that this undermined American manhood. And so that combined with the closing of the American frontier, again, this is something that Theodore Roosevelt was worried about. This is something that Carl Jung was worried about. This is something that many people at that time were worried about. And it's why, for example, Theodore Roosevelt wrote a lot about the strenuous life and how he wanted young men to throw themselves into a strenuous life, build muscle, be strong, be adventurous, Don't be overly urban. He didn't mean that ethnically, obviously, in his day. Don't be overly cityfied is probably how the West would have said it. And so keep your manhood, so to speak. Keep all the things that makes the man real. And, he had to overcome horrible sickness and had to lift weights and work out and overcome a terrible condition of asthma. So he knew what it was to master himself. And so that's where most historians peg it, late 1800s. And I've got a book called Manhood at Harvard that's all about how in the first decades of the 20th century, a lot of the professors at Harvard, like, again, Theodore Roosevelt was a student during that time, they're trying to recover manhood. They're trying to recover this lost manhood because they're experiencing a lot of feminized masculinity. And I think it's because of those two things. Naturally speaking, the closing of the frontier, but Anne says it's because of theological liberalism and the loss of what you call muscular Christianity. Even the movie Chariots of Fire is about this muscular Christianity, and Eric Liddell being a muscular Christian who could be an example to the world.
Do you see some of the things that are going on in the culture now? Why can't some of the pastors reclaim some of this stuff where they are inside their churches? Why can't they do that?
Well, they can, and they should do it. And actually, one of the charts, if you just all you care about is church growth, by the way, just pure church growth, the statistics show that if you'll focus a church on drawing men, that you'll draw families as a whole. Whereas if you focus a church on women or children, you don't draw the family as a whole. Like, there are statistics behind that. But most pastors don't know how to lead a manly church, so to speak. They don't know how to lead that from the pulpit. They hand off the men's ministry to somebody on the side, some kind of subculture within the church, and then they lead a kind of gender neutral kind of worship experience on Sunday mornings. It's not working, and that's where we get the jokes. A man eating lion would die of starvation in most churches, or there aren't. And this is insulting, but there aren't two genders. There are three: men, women, and preachers. We've all heard those kinds of insulting jokes, but it's because the church is often seen as a place that doesn't encourage noble masculinity. So pastors can do it, should do it. They don't teach it in seminaries. They don't teach it in Bible colleges. And so most men are left to fish on their own. And most pastors, quite frankly, as they say in the South, hire it done. They just hand it off to somebody and pay them to take it. But it's not run from the core of the church, so it doesn't work. And it's why most ministries are boring to most men. Yeah.
The job itself, you've been in ministry before. I mean, you were in ministry for years. And
yes.
So you can kind of understand there is this weird thing that happens, I think, and this is a preaching podcast. And so one of the things I think is valuable to talk about is there is an estrangement between the normal job of a pastor or a preacher and your typical rural guy in the community. There's an honest, difference. I mean, there's a kind of a chasm between those two things. And a guy can get to really feeling like, well, I mean, I sit in an office and I type all day. Other people are bucking hay bales and, digging ditches and doing this kind of thing. But I don't really even feel like a man. And I think that's kind of one of the things you address with your book. Manly men do manly things. Right. And specifically, one of the things you say is this isn't about a list of things men do. It's that men do things, manly things. They do manly things, and that's a hard thing. What can you talk about with that in ministry in your own experience?
Well, I try to tell you that most pastors, quite frankly, they would be better pastors if they would not hide away in their office and type, but they would develop hobbies and a lifestyle that connects with the men in the church. Most pastors, I got to tell you, we have a huge amount of loss of clergy, loss of ministers in this country. Suicide's high, depression's high, marital problems are high, the clergy's in trouble, to put it broadly. And I think, frankly, pastors would be better off, not just more relevant to men, but they'd be better off if they were out doing whatever, riding horses, hunting, fishing, lifting weights, playing racquetball, whatever it is, being a man. I think for most pastors, I'm talking about male pastors now, the process of pastoring becomes a feminizing process. You work mainly with women, you lean towards the feminine, you lean towards the less masculine side of who you are. So I got to tell you, the churches that I see that are the most successful is where the pastor, first of all, makes sure that he tends the manhood in his own life, and then second of all, gets connected to men at a man's level. I mean, that can be about riding a motorcycle, write it or don't. I don't care. I'm not trying to push things in that direction. But I know guys, pastors who ride motorcycles, and he connects with a lot of men in this church by riding a motorcycle. For other cultures and other parts of the country, it's something different. It's horses, or it's tennis in California, or whatever. The point is, I think you're putting your finger on something very, very important. The average pastor does feel disconnected from the men in his church, and it's his fault. It's his fault. You've got to negotiate your deal, or whatever you got to do with the deacons or the elders, and make sure you've got time to connect with men. Because if you'll lead that church from the pulpit in a direction that's man-friendly, you will grow a strong church. You will have help and support. You won't have the depression and the suicide and the things entering into your own life, the isolation in your own life, and we'll have healthier churches.
Yeah. I need to tell you a brief story. I had an existential crisis a couple weeks back, thinking through some stuff. I'm admiring, there's a lot of good things going on in my life, but I felt this kind of discontent just kind of coming over the top of me. And this is what's bad about it, is this is where it happened. I'm out back filling up my pool. Okay. You want to talk about terrible problems in the world? Let me tell you about terrible problems in the world.
I'm waiting for this to get bad. Go ahead.
Okay. So here it is. So the church that I'm preaching at is doing well. Okay. It's doing real well. And we're expanding, and we're putting in another campus with Levi and some of his people on that end. Okay.
Great.
The podcast is going well. I mean, just really good. People are saying this is really filling a need. And so that's good. I decided I was going to apply to grad school, got accepted. And I'm like, and I thought, yeah, we'll see. Maybe I want to dive in. Maybe I don't. It's good. My marriage is good. My kids are good. Things are going well. I've been working on this book I told you about last time we were on, working on this David book. And so I'm working with an editor. And he writes me back and says, "Hey, Jared, this is great. Here's some edits. What do you think?" It's good. He's like, "I need the manuscript. Don't send me another chapter. Send me the manuscript. Like give me what you have." And I'm a little skittish about sending it. And I'm filling up my pool. And this is what I say to myself: my water pressure sucks. My water pressure filling up my pool sucks. And I kind of got this feeling just like, why can't I just have good water pressure? And I thought, Jared, there's something wrong with you if you've got some really good thing. What's going on? So just so happens we had men's meeting that night. We get to our men's meeting, and I sat down with this group. I said, "Hey, listen, can I sit in the hot seat for a second? I just need to process through some stuff." And I tell them everything I just told you. And they all get this smirk on their face like, you're about to get lit up. You're about to get lit up.
My favorite part of life.
Good.
That's right.
Favorite part of life.
That's right. I mean, and I'm sitting there and I'm like, listen, I'm just trying to see, I don't know what's going on here. What do you guys see? And they all got this smirk on their face, and this, that look when guys, they're coming after you, like,
sure.
I'm about to get you, and they lean into me. One guy says, wasn't it in the sermon 2 weeks ago that you said we have to learn how to live in the uncomfortable? And I said, yeah. One says, what are you afraid of? The other one says, are you putting as much time into this book as God has asked you to put into this book, or are you neglecting it? If you are neglecting it, why are you neglecting it? What are you scared of? Hey, they just keep coming. I mean, they just keep coming at me. And I'm like, oh, son of a gun. Man, this guy says to me, hey, I got a text message a long time ago when I was in crisis. And here's what it says. Everything you need to succeed, Christ has already put inside of you. All you have to do is reach in and grab it, and the Holy Spirit will take care of the rest. Jared, do I need to tell you where I got that text message? I said, no. I'm good. I got it. They said, listen, are you saying you haven't been working on this book that you are convinced God wants you to work on? I said, that's what I'm saying. And another guy says, so you want contentment without obedience? Is that what you want?
Wow.
Like, hey, in that moment, I'm like, I could not be in a better room. I couldn't be in a better room. Isn't that great? Isn't that just
It's
incredible? Absolutely incredible.
But I got to tell you, most pastors don't have that. Most pastors don't have a band of brothers. Most men, frankly, don't have a band of brothers. I got that same thing. I'll tell you what, the last people I want to complain to are these guys. And these guys, it just happens to be that my band of brothers, they're pretty successful. I told you before, some of them are ex-NFL and stuff. Pretty successful people. I mean, they're not bothered by talk about pool or, pools or whatever, flying places and stuff. But they will flat get on my case for any self-pity or any kind of laziness or any kind of whining, And so every man's got to have that because he doesn't see himself clearly.
Yeah, I keep thinking about that line that you use, that free fire zone. And
Yes.
man, that's hard to develop. That's really hard to develop because, I mean, you really have to trust that that guy's not going to go run and hide,
Yeah, absolutely. You've got to have it. I mean, there's not any area of our lives that we improve without a free fire zone.
Yeah.
The man sitting to your right there only gets better as an athlete when his coaches engage in a free fire zone. They didn't walk up and say, can I address something in your life today? They just
Right.
grabbed his helmet and melt the side of his helmet with yelling at him, or whatever. And that's how that works. And you just can't, we've got to get back to that. We've got to get back to it in the church. And by the way, every pastor I know is at risk, almost every pastor I know, because they don't come down off the lofty pulpit, so to speak, and stop sort of being exalted in worship to be with a bunch of guys and just let them hit away if they need to.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about beating up on them. I'm talking about being able to say what needs to be said.
Yeah. Yeah. When we, men really enjoy the Old Testament. We like what's in the Old Testament, I mean, when you find people outside of that like that, we kind of like eye for an eye. We like the sex scandals. We like somebody getting murdered and get the head lopped off. Like that's some stuff we really like. When we get to the New Testament, it's almost like something changes in there and masculinity looks different and civilization has made a shift somehow. And it's almost like we lose some of that. What are some examples of masculinity in the New Testament that maybe we've been missing as pastors and as men?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And the problem is, of course, the way we read the New Testament. We read it religiously. We don't read it like our newspapers. Now, I understand we have to read it religiously and with faith, but just consider the life of Jesus for a moment. I'm not preaching. This is a life that really inspires me. Jesus was hunted every day of his life. People were trying to kill him every day of his life. He had to be taken away from his hometown and raised in the mountains so that people couldn't kill him and get to him. His own family thought he was nuts when he started his ministry. His family showed up trying to take him away from where he was preaching. Why, it says in the Bible? Because they thought he was out of his mind. His father probably died while he was a young man. Joseph leaves the story, as you guys know, fairly early in the whole thing. He's betrayed by his best friends, but he also has rowdy time with his friends. For 3 years, he's with a bunch of stinky fishermen. They're breaking wind. They're arguing. They're messing around. They're throwing him in the lake. You know what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
But still, that some of them betray him. It goes on and on and on. And so when you start, I'm not just talking about the cross in those 6 hours, but I'm talking about his whole life. He's a man. He's fasting. He's living in the wilderness. I have a scholar friend who once tracked how far Jesus is just recorded to have walked during the time of the entire gospel account. It's miles and miles and miles and miles. He's walking everywhere. He's living in the wild. This is manly stuff, what he has to battle, what he has to deal with, not just physically, but in his soul, being betrayed. His own brothers taunted him and said, if you want to be famous, you should go to Jerusalem. The Bible says in the very next line, because they didn't really believe in him. His own brothers. So this is a guy who suffered. This is a guy who had opposition. This is a guy who was despised. This is a guy who had enemies trying to kill him. And that's all before we even get to the quote unquote Passion Week, that last week in Jerusalem. So there's an example. Another guy I really admire is Cornelius. Now, some folks may not remember who Cornelius is, but in Acts 10, Cornelius is a Roman centurion. But he's kind to the Jews, got a heart for the Jews, so to speak. He gives a lot of money to the Jews for their synagogue and so on. He's a man after God's heart. But he's a soldier, man. He's a Roman soldier. He's tough. He can kill any of these people if he wants to. But he's kind and polite. And so, quite frankly, the Gentile Pentecost, the outpouring of the Holy Spirit that's not for the Jews exclusively, as the one in Jerusalem was, happens in his living room because he's a faithful man. An angel shows up and says, your gifts to the poor have come up before God as a memorial offering. This man's a soldier. He's a man of character. He's a man of generosity. He even sends a soldier to go get Peter so that Peter can preach in his living room and the Gentile Pentecost can happen. So there are lots of men in the New Testament, but what we have to do, if I may be blunt, is we got to take a little time and meditate about these people's lives. Think about them. Think about Paul, man. Paul is hacking people to death. Then he gets knocked on his butt off of a horse on the Damascus road, and God says, There's no "Just as I Am" playing. There's no sweet music. Get up. I've got something for you to do. Get into, that kind of thing. He lives blind for the first few days of his Christian life. And it goes on and on and on. He's almost killed a bunch of times. And it just, but we got to take time and think through what's going on and think about these people being flesh and blood human beings. So the over-spiritualizing of the New Testament, the reading the stories in a religious-y way without taking a moment to go, what did Paul really endure? He was beaten. He was almost killed and ostracized and rejected. And I've been in the prison that he was in. Maybe you've been to Jerusalem too, or I'm sorry, Rome too, and been to the prison. It's a hole in the ground, man. It's a cave. He was there for years. That's manly stuff. So we got to think differently about the stuff in the New Testament. I think we'll find it just as exciting and just as much manly as the Old Testament, but we've got kind of a religious veneer over the whole thing. Yeah, I agree. I do love that line. And what it does is it tips me off a little bit, and should tip off other guys, to kind of the nature of God. When the phrase is, I'm supposed to go get Paul, and he goes, oh yeah, you're going to go get Paul. I'm going to show him how much he's going to suffer for me. Yes. That's a great line. I mean, that's to me, and I think for other guys, if they could get to that place, like that's a God I can worship. One that I know, like, fella, I'm coming after you. I'm not going to let you be sorry. I'm not. You're going to get it. I'm going to line you out. Yeah, that's good. Thank you for talking through some of that.
I feel that when I don't know. I feel weird just interjecting.
No, you're good.
When I'm talking like football players and stuff, track guys, these are the manliest guys you can find, right? Guys squatting 700 pounds but the only thing they can tell me about Jesus is that he loves me. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like we haven't taught them anything. Yeah. And so they probably grew up going to Bible school, and they probably grew up doing the whole thing, but they don't want anything to do with it. They're the manliest dudes in the world, right?
Yeah.
Right? Maybe. But you know what I'm saying? They don't want anything to do with it. They don't want to wake up on Sunday and get told someone loves them. I mean,
that's true.
It sounds
exactly,
terrible,
and that's why we've got to tell these stories to the next generation. We got to take these Bible stories from these cute little Sunday school stories, and tell them as they are. Like you just mentioned, a man whom God said, go lay hands on Paul so he can see. I've got to show him how much he's going to suffer. Well, think about that dude. Hold up, Paul's killing all the Christians. He's hacking people to death.
Right.
And God says, dude, go lay hands on Paul. And the guy even says back, Lord, he's killing everybody, right?
Right.
Well, we can make that a humorous moment in a sermon, but think about the manhood of that. Think about the risk of that. Think about what's going on. And, and that's why, we're talking about a world, back to Jesus for a moment. He's teaching along, and suddenly he says, that's why you guys are trying to kill me. He's talking to people in the crowd. That's how dramatic this is. And if we really get a great movie one day of the life of Jesus, it's going to be that kind of mud and blood and beer and guts and, because it was real stuff. So, I'm with you. But I get excited about these stories because I think the Bible is the best book or the best manual for manhood. But we just read it like a "now I lay me down to sleep" kind of Sunday school story without realizing what it's really about.
Right. Yeah.
If I'm passionate about this, I'm sorry.
It's not. No, this is good. This is good because part of the thing that we see over and over, at the church, at our church here, and what we're doing with some of Levi's people, we're putting in the church. Well, one of the things that we've done, they're 70 miles south of us, so we're going to do like a live stream and broadcast our stuff and have a campus pastor. And one of the things we've done here is we've tried to push a masculine culture, and not because we like MMA and we wear affliction T-shirts, that are 2 sizes too small. I'm not talking about, but one of the things that we've done is we've really purposely reached in and grabbed some of the difficult things of Scripture. So inside our sanctuary, we've hung banners of our mission statement. Well, one of them is a picture of brass knuckles hanging inside the sanctuary. And one of the things that happens is people come in and they say, "Are those brass knuckles hanging on the banner?" It's like, yeah, they are. Can you explain that to me? Like, yes, we can explain that to you. Here's what it is. Paul said, I beat my body and I make it a slave, right? And so we talk about the passage. This is what it means. Well, if you go to the Greek, one of the things about the Greek is it says, I black my own eye and I put me in shackles. And so then the question becomes, is there any aspect of your life to where you need to black your own eye and handcuff yourself in the back seat so that that guy doesn't get a hold of the steering wheel? Any part of your life that needs that? Yeah, dude, like there's probably a lot of areas in my life. Okay, then this is the right place. This is the right place for you, because that's a thing we care about. If we let the guy from the back seat get up here and get a hold of the steering wheel, we ruin everybody around us. We're going to make something. We're going to create something today. Maybe destruction, maybe good things, but we're going to create something today. And that's been the really cool part for us on our end, is being able to try to push that idea. And of course, we're in a world that, masculinity's kind of got a bad name at this point.
Right, exactly. But I think you're absolutely right. When it comes to churches, you've got to overemphasize it in that direction. I mean, I wrote a book called Killing Jesus, and when I broke down what happened in the crucifixion, what happened in his scourging, what happened in that horrible bloody walk through Jerusalem, what happened on the cross, I mean, at the natural level. I mean, yeah, because I'm a Christian, it moves me spiritually, and it moves me for what my Lord suffered. But there's also a manly story there, and I got to tell you summon something from men when you tell it the way it is. And so I admire what you're doing. I really do. I think it's valuable, and that's what we've got to do. We've got a handle on how to reach women in churches. That's going well. Most churches are a majority women, and if you, as you and I have talked about before, if you have a women's event, 90% of the women in the church show up. Man, they just bond instantly. But you have a men's event, you're lucky to get 5% of the men in the church. And that's because we haven't built a culture that's attractive to men. But what we're talking about right now is part of it. Men will show up for something that's not now I lay me down to sleep, and that challenges them as men.
Yeah. One of the things we've experienced, just for other listeners, this was kind of cool for us. We don't have open invitation to men's Bible studies. Like we don't say, hey, men's Bible study is going to meet on Wednesday morning. What we do is we go find guys inside the congregation, and we invite that guy, we invite that guy, we invite that guy, and then we go on because of the exclusivity part. You know who's going to show up to an open invitation to your men's Bible study in the morning? Probably dudes that don't need your men's Bible study at that hour in the morning. Probably that's who's going to show up. But there's a different deal if it's I want you and I want you and I want you. I think there's something there that's going to make me stronger, make you stronger. But guys will show up for that. We've watched that happen for years. They will show up for that meeting.
That's right. That's right.
That's been a cool thing.
Well, and I think you and I talked about before, the art of the indirect connection is really part of that too. Men just don't bond well by looking each other in the eye and going, "How you feeling, Joe? Tell me about your week." Let's sacrifice an animal. Let's watch a game. I'm not saying that's all we do, but we get to know each other that way. Yeah. And then the stuff of God, the things of our souls, the things of the challenge of our generation, they come up. Men love that kind of stuff. The guy, I think I mentioned this before, the guy who does this best is a guy who pastors a church called Manna Church. His name is Michael Fletcher. He's right outside of Fort Bragg. And because he's got such a, Fort Bragg, of course, being a special forces, post, he's got about 10,000 people. He decided years ago, I'm going to build a church leaning towards men, and it'll serve women well. So whereas most churches have 80% of their staff jobs occupied by women, he made them occupied by men, and he's done something amazing. I think now he's up in the 12,000 range. That's awesome. It's a church totally turned towards men, and I mean it serves women massively. But it's because they benefit from turning towards men, and he does it right. I'm really proud of him, and I think other pastors can do the same thing. They just haven't been taught.
That's really great. Well, he might be a good one. I should reach out to, have some conversation with.
You should. And by the way, one of the questions we ought to ask, since we're all talking about preachers and churches here, is does anyone even know of a course in a Christian school, much less in a seminary, on men's psychology, men's ministry, the challenge of men today, what's going on in our generation? I mean, the statistics are horrifying. Nobody should be able to get out of a school that prepares them for leadership in a church without having to have at least what they used to call a mini-master or a mini course of some sort on men's psychology, the challenge of men, what's going on, etc., and the most effective techniques for ministering to men. Absolutely not, but that happens all the time, and you and I know it.
Yeah, no, I don't know of anything. Class that's like that. I don't
either. I mean, maybe one of your watchers and viewers and listeners will tell us about that, but I don't know of anything, and I'm out there speaking in a lot of these schools, trying to stir up trouble and trying to get them to do this stuff.
Yeah. Well, that would be a good one. We ought to. There's a couple local schools here. We've probably got some decent connection with. We ought to push and see if we can't get that done, because it would be very, very helpful, especially ministry schools. It'd be very helpful.
At least a night or a weekend or something during the course of the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the crisis of manhood in our generation is one of the worst crises that we've got going anywhere. Men's suicide rate is at an all-time high. So you can't throw people into ministry and not tell them this stuff, and yet most schools don't have it. So anyway, I know I'm picking a fight there, but
no, I don't think it's great. I'm all about it. I'm all about it. That's perfect.
I'm a preacher's kid, and I can attest to that. My dad's one of the manliest men I know, and Jared could probably say that too. But even as a preacher's kid, your dad's everyone else's.
Yeah.
Yeah. And everyone else is coming to your dad, and sometimes you're like, well, I wish I could have some of that, and they don't have any idea. I think that they miss that sometimes. They're men. I mean, sometimes for me, I'm 23. I don't know how to take that next step into manhood,
Right.
As a preacher's kid.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
I think that would be something maybe they could talk about.
Yeah. Right.
Well, absolutely. I got to tell you, too, that no man in the church, least of all the pastor, should be raising his sons alone. I mean, it really does take a village. So if I'm in your church, yeah, I want your dad to be a good dad to you, but I've also got my eyes on you. I'm also going to come talk to you. We want to initiate the young men into a noble culture of manhood that pervades the whole church. So your dad doesn't have to do that alone. If he's in a busy season or having a hard time or has to be on the road a lot or whatever, I pull in with you. Others pull in with you. We kick your butt. We challenge you. We get in the middle of it. That's how it works.
Yeah, I found a kid in our church, just graduated high school not long ago. Got him a copy of your book. Took him to lunch, and I said, "Listen," I said, "I need to talk to you. I've not done a good job as a pastor in reaching out to you, and I think you're the linchpin. I think you are the linchpin for growth inside your family. He's got a good mom, he's got a good dad, but I said, I think you're going to see some massive growth happen inside your family if we can get you into a healthy place. And he said, okay. And I said, so first, I'm sorry. I should have done this earlier in your life, and I didn't do it. I felt like I would be intrusive to do it, but you're 17 years old. And so now we're going to do this thing. Second thing, I want you to be praying right now. I want you to ask God for confidence in your life. This is the thing you need. You need massive amounts of confidence, because he doesn't have any confidence. Sure. The third thing is this. What's your thing? Be praying. What is your thing? What is your thing? I said, okay. I'll do it. I left. I went out of town. I was in Colorado for a week. When I came back, I said, so let's talk. I gave you a little workout plan. Before then, what do you see? What's happened? What's going on? He took this notebook that I gave him, and he went through and he made a list of things that he'd been praying for. And all of a sudden, here's what I see. And this is the coolest thing. The list started small. I'm praying for confidence, and what's my thing? Babe, by the time we got down to the other end, it's got, I walked this many miles, and also I'm studying on this deal here because I want to take the driving test, and I'm going to do instantly sure. Just started to grow, incredible, absolutely incredible.
Well, that's the way the male soul works, which is why we can have a greater impact than we think we can have. I appreciate all the kind things you're saying about this book, but it's one book. But you put that truth into men's souls, and it amplifies. They take it, they run with it, they expand it, they do things. People are always telling me stuff they did because of my books. I never even thought about what they've done. The kind of stuff the way they're responding is like news to me. But they took core truths and had that planted in their souls, and they ran with it. That's what this young man did with you. You planted some stuff in his life, and then his soul amplified it. That's the good news. That if we'll plant, if we'll coach, if we'll father, these guys, especially, by the way, millennials, will run with it in a way that we've never dreamed.
Oh, they're hungry, aren't they? Hungry for it.
And they're also creative. They're just creative, Like I'm a slightly older guy. I'm old enough to be a lot of these guys' grandfather. But I had a big meeting here frankly, some people are going to be disturbed by this, but I decided to have a big men's meeting at a great big bar in Nashville. So I had the bar closed, and had the guys come. It just was a space I could use. It wasn't like I was trying to push alcohol. And young guys came to that and got lit up. Well, the next thing I know, they're doing massive drum circles of manhood, and things like this that my generation never thought about. What is a drum circle? I don't have a clue. But I mean, they were doing it. They were having a ball, and there were bagpipes, and there was hacky sack, and everything in the world going on. And I'm like, okay, dudes, go for it, man. I'm with you. But I hadn't thought about any of that stuff, and that's the beauty of this thing, man. Let's let the next generation run, but let's send them out with power and strength.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Sex has always been a staple of the masculine conversation. It's always been, whether it's bragging about what you've conquered and who you've conquered. It's always been a thing inside of that. When we come to Scripture, we don't hear much conversation about sexuality. Even when it comes to Jesus, we don't see much of sexuality inside of that. Do you think the lack of, and I don't know the best way to say this, the lack of sexuality that we see in Jesus, do you think that is such a perfect thing? I mean, this is how I interpret it for our broken culture when it comes to sexuality, because sexuality is such a screwed up thing where we are now, and Jesus' lack of it. It seems like that's almost perfect, that's so absent inside of Scripture.
Yeah, it's absent and then it's not. Again, there are things that are said in Scripture. We got to take a moment. We're supposed to meditate on Scripture. Take a moment and think about what that means. What does it mean that Jesus was tempted in all ways as I am? He's not some spirit floating around. He's a guy who's eating. He drank enough wine that people criticized him and said he's a drunk. I mean, I don't think he was getting drunk. I'm just saying they're expanding that. So I'm going to be a little bit graphic here, but I promise not to be unclean. Jesus at least had to think about what a nice pair of breasts meant. Yeah. Right? Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying he was tempted in every last little dirty detail of every human being on the planet. Sure. But I am saying he had to deal with lust so he could conquer it. Right. So he knows what it's like to lay in bed at night and be a little lonely. He probably knows what it's like to lay in bed at night and think about doing things to himself. He probably definitely knows what it's like to look at a good-looking woman. You understand what I'm saying? So it's there. We just need to break it out. The New Testament is like condensed truth. The Old Testament is like expanded truth. And the New Testament, you got to rely on the Holy Spirit and some meditation to think about this. So, I see Jesus as a flesh and blood, and he's fully man. And one of the things that excites me is that sitting at the right hand of God right now is a man. And he turns to the Father and he says, look, Stephen's having trouble here because this is how this feels. I've been there. When that woman wears that really low cut thing, that's what's going on. Let's have the Holy Spirit give him some strength in this particular way. That's what he's doing. He's an advocate for us. He's an intercessor for us because he's been down here and he knows what too much wine is, what that temptation feels like. He knows what the power temptations feel like. He knows what lust feels like. I'm quite sure those guys who were hunting him, he wanted to punch their lights out. Yeah, and remember, the profession, his profession was not just carpentry, it was stonemason. So this dude was buff. This dude was like the blacksmith in the American West, just pumped arms and everything because he hurled rock around and big logs and stuff. So he wasn't absent masculinity. I'm sure he wanted to punch a lot of people out. What do you think he was praying for in the Garden of Gethsemane? Lord, if this can pass, I want to kill these dudes. Right. So I'm not trying to make him too human, but I think that sometimes we've got to let just a brief mention of something in the Gospels or the Bible lapse over the whole story. I see Jesus, even though there's not much mention of sexuality, there's no question that he saw it, thought about it, was at least for a second tempted by it, and that's why he knows what Stephen needs when he walks through the world. Yeah, yeah. Thanks for diving into that. I appreciate that. That's really good. That's really good. I should say real quickly, if I can interrupt you. The other thing is, though, that for a man, everything is related to sex. Sure. So if you come to me like the devil did to Jesus and say, look, I'm going to make you powerful. Well, that in my soul is connected to sex. If I'm 18, you tell me I'm going to be powerful, I'm thinking I'll get girls. Yeah. I'm not 18, but I'm saying that's what a man thinks. Oh, really? I'm going to be able to rule over the nations of the earth? I'll get women. Everything in some way is connected to sex when it comes to a man's soul. So all those temptations in the wilderness that Jesus went through were in some distant or secondary way connected to sex, as they are in a man's soul. Yeah, well, that's the next question for me. The next question that I'm curious about is, we see these temptations and the way they're preached, it's so bad. Like, it's so bad. Here it is. Okay, Stephen, I don't know if you've ever been tempted like Jesus, like you've looked at rocks and thought, man, I'm so hungry, I'd like to turn them into bread. Like,
Come on, really? That if you've ever climbed up on the top of something high and thought you should jump off and see if, come on, that's not. I get that there's the temptation, like I see that part of it, but take me behind the temptation. Take me behind that thing to the next thing. Like, what am I really going to get? That's what you just said.
Well, yeah, exactly. Let's just think about it for a moment. Satan tempted Jesus and said, if you worship me, I'll give you the splendor of the nations, which has been delivered to me. It was something Adam had that got lost to Satan. Well, what's the splendor of the nations include? My guess is it has to do with Porsches. My guess is it has to do with dancing babes. Yeah. My guess it has to do with massive steaks and great big bottles of whiskey and massive houses. And you know what I'm talking about. I'm being silly to make a point, but I mean, the splendor of the nations, this is ranches, this is vineyards, this is swimming pools with babes adorning around the edge of it. This is the splendor, all the beauty of all the nations and all the wealth and all the stuff a man can enjoy. That's what Satan tempted him with. Again, we got to take a moment, think about what was being said. He didn't just say, if you'll fall down and worship me, I'll give you a church, in the backwaters of Texas. That's not what he said. He said, I'll give you the splendor of the nations. Well, what does that include? Every glorious, everything on the lifestyles of the rich and disgusting on television, everything we see in the magazines, everything, And so he was being tempted with all of it, including sex. Yeah. And he battled it the right way. So no, I've never been tempted to turn a stone into bread. I have been tempted to pummel you for a sandwich. I was so hungry, And
right.
So, that's what we've got to realize is working there.
Right. Yeah. Well, when I look at some of those, one of the things that I see a few things. What's behind some of these temptations? I see self-reliance. This thing of like, I'm going to make my own way. Here's another thought. I don't know about you, but when I'm hungry and I'm tired and I'm lonely, it's what the 12 steppers, they kind of step into this thing called HALT. You need to check yourself. HALT, hungry, angry, lonely, tired. If you find yourself hungry, angry, that might be part of the reason that you're feeling triggered on some level. Jesus is fasting and he's hungry, angry, lonely, and tired.
Right.
This guy is vulnerable, and so self-reliance. I mean, the other need for affirmation, need for adventure, need something to push that dopamine button again. You see that with so many guys. Like, I need to push the dopamine button. But listen, here's what your job is: to talk ladies off the ledge and type at your computer all the time. Of course, you need to find a way to push the dopamine button. You're bored to tears, bored to tears.
And we also have to be very careful to fight against the things that make us feel entitled. When I'm bitter, I feel entitled. When somebody wrongs me, I feel entitled, right? These people wronged me. I'll eat what I want. I'll buy what I want. I'll drink what I want. I'll speak to them in any rude way I want to. Yeah. One of my favorite examples is Richard Nixon during the horrible days of Watergate. What does he do? He gets on his knees in the Oval Office, starts beating the floor, talking about how they're treating him. Well, who was they? It wasn't the Democrats at the time during Watergate. It's the people who picked on his Quaker family back in California when he was a little boy, because the soul has a memory like an elephant. So his bitterness from his childhood made him feel entitled to do wrong things that almost ruined our country permanently. And so that the same thing happens with our lives. Whatever goes on here, if my wife wrongs me, I feel entitled to mistreat her. Right. I don't mean that literally, but that's the pattern for us men. So we've got to watch all of that. And Jesus, I think that's why it says that it didn't just say he fasted for 40 days, it said he was hungry. But what happens is when you fast, you're hungry initially, then the hunger goes away. Then when your body's feeding on itself, you get hungry again at the end of a 40-day fast. He's in an extreme state, and that's when Satan comes and hammers him. Well, sure, he's feeling entitled. I can turn this forest into a feast right now with one word. But that's not what he chose to do. And that gives us the chance to have victory over that same stuff.
Yeah. I think, I can't remember the author, in talking about the Enneagram, if you're familiar with the Enneagram, what they call shadow work, doing some of the shadow work. You're talking about Nixon. It made me think of the shadow work, and Nixon needing to go back and deal with some of the bitterness, deal with some of the roots of some of that stuff. Like you have got to be, Jordan Peterson, I'm sure you're familiar with.
Yes.
If you, and I can't remember how he says it, something along the lines of, you better know your most malevolent self. You need to be very familiar with your most malevolent self, the part of you that really wants to. That's a safe man. A safe man is a man who is in touch with his level of malevolence, that he knows that he can go and just really destroy something. That guy is a safe guy. The guy that is not safe is a guy who has no idea what's on the other side of that, in the shadows, you know.
And Jerry, you know, we're living in a world now where that malevolence itself is torturing our society. You and I are recording this shortly after there have been two unbelievably vile, ridiculous shootings in malls, one in Dayton, Ohio, and one in El Paso, Texas. And, you know, in one case, I mean, one guy was pulling the political left, the other guy was pulling the political right. There's hardly a pattern. But in both cases, these guys gave in to their demons. They gave in to their malevolent self. And one of the guys, we're told, now the police are saying, he just was hungry and decided to stop off in that particular mall. And while he was there, he decided to shoot up the place. That's how happenstance it was. And so we've got a world that's being tortured largely by young men who cannot get on top of their malevolent self, and it's destroying our society. And that's more of an issue, I have to say, quite frankly, than Muslim terrorists or other kinds of terrorists in the world. Young, unfathered, untethered, undisciplined, unprincipled, white, I'll say it as a white man, white young men of the kind you and I are trying to fix all the time. They're the guys torturing our society more than some of the people that we tend to talk about as being the big baddies, you know, the big monsters. It's actually coming out of our own society that this disease, this plague, is doing the kind of things that we had done this past weekend.
Do I have a role and a responsibility to father the young men around me who I see going astray? Do I have that responsibility in my life?
Absolutely. Absolutely. One of the things that makes me go crazy is when we have one of these shootings, there are always people around this young man saying, well, I knew something was wrong. I just didn't know what to do. I attend a largely African-American church in Washington, D.C. And my African-American friends have got this phrase out there. I love it. They always say, get a hand on a man. Get a hand on a man. And that's their kind of code or fun way of saying, you know, don't just walk alone. Get a hand on a man. Find out what's going on in the guy's life. If you get your hand on him, you're touching him. If you're eating a burger with him, if you're looking in his eyes, you're going to know what's going on. And most of these shooters, most of these guys who shoot up schools and campuses and malls like this last weekend, they're lonely. They're kind of the you know, the nonconformist, the outcast, the kid that's on the margins kind of thing. If someone had just gotten a hand on them, if someone had pulled them in, invited them to a pool, invited them to a dinner, sat down with them, walked with them, met them in school, if someone had just stepped into their lives, I'm convinced a lot of this stuff would have been cut off. But the crisis of male loneliness is turning into a crisis of male violence, both in the form of suicide and in the form we saw this last weekend. So I think every man's got that obligation. And that's why what we've got to do together is build a contagious culture of noble manhood and then initiate the boys into it. I certainly want you as an individual, of course, as a pastor, to be reaching into the lives of young men. But better that you've got 100 men who together are building a noble culture of manhood, and you're bringing these young men into a culture that where they can be loved and where they fit and where they can be initiated and where they can be brought up to be great men.
Yeah. It's so good. Thanks for talking about that. What are some of the things that we're going to see as from a historian's perspective, as the pendulum swings? You've watched how culture goes from one side to the other. We went Barack Obama, we went Donald Trump. When we see what we see in masculinity within the church, how's the pendulum going to swing in the future? What's going to unfold for the church next?
Well, there are many trends that are going to happen. One of the most important for us is, as you know, there's this kind of animosity towards manhood. All manhood is considered to be toxic masculinity. And so you've got a dynamic gay movement. You've got a movement away from traditional models of manhood. You've got a feminine vision of manhood. But I'll tell you what, you've just put your finger right on one of the most important trends in understanding societies, and that is that the pendulum swings. The pendulum swings. And while right now we're talking about letting young boys at a young age alter themselves surgically, we got a dynamic gay movement and all that kind of stuff. The fact is, people are not going to find fulfillment in this. Men need to be men. Now, they don't need to be toxic men. They don't need to be damaging men. They don't need to be vile men, but they do need to be men. So what's going to happen is we're going to have this movement away from noble manhood now. Call it what you will, great manhood, righteous manhood. And what's going to happen is our society is going to swing back. They're going to want to know what manhood is. They're going to need it, especially given what's happening in our society. I mean, even the secular press is saying, where were the men in the lives of these shooters this past weekend?
Yeah.
Well, John Eldridge would say, you've made them all women. you know? And so I think what's going to happen is we're going to see the pendulum swings. That's one thing that's true about all social movements. You always see the pendulum swing. Interesting little sidelight. Just been watching this week some of the TV shows about Woodstock, that concert that happened in 1969 that defined the generation of boomers. Well, the boomers who started out as hippies making love in the mud, you know, while the Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, you know, performed on stage. What did they become? They became yuppies. They became investors. They became millionaires. They became wealthy. They became, you know, Steve Jobs and Bill Gates. They made a total pendulum swing, and that's what happens in society. So we need to be ready for when society. We need to be, first of all, influencing everybody we can as much as we can, like you just said, get a hand on them, man. But also realizing our society is going to swing back, and they're going to need models of noble manhood, and we better be ready not only to describe it, but to teach people how to incorporate it into their lives.
Yeah, which the lack of masculinity in the home, in the church, in the community, in society, how much does that affect, if we can dive into this, the LGBTQ, where we're talking about kids surgically changing themselves at an early age. You're talking crazy early. I mean,
yeah.
or with hormones. How do those two things come together? How do is there a connection between the two?
There's absolutely a connection. And because I live in D.C. and I'm not bragging, but the majority of my friends are black, I'm in touch with the statistics about black families. In America, the majority of families don't have a male in the home, a father figure in the home. In the African American community, it's 70% nationwide. No male figure in the home. They've also begun to do research to show that when a divorce happens, often it's normally the young male who is the most affected. The family splits, the child is left with the mother. The mother's usually mad at men because she's just been through a bad divorce against the kid's father. There's no one in the home then to model noble manhood, to call out masculinity in this young man's soul. So you have that feeds then the gay tendency. It feeds the gay movement in America. And so there's no question that a lack of men in the home who can call out noble manhood, and then a bitterness towards the misbehaving men, however justified, still it's a bitterness towards misbehaving men, creates an environment in which young men don't know who they are. Their primary models are women. So you have at the least a feminine kind of version of masculinity, if not a full-on commitment to gay or transgender, that kind of thing. So there's no question there's a direct connection, and that's why churches need to be calling out men. Yeah, challenging families, have the Dr. Dobson kind of focus on the family perspective in the church, but you've got to focus on men because they're the key to the thing. God knows the women, heroic women, have kept this stuff together for many, many years. Thank God for the grandmas. Thank God for the single moms who have made this stuff work. They need to be lauded, but the church needs to be putting the onus on men, and that'll fix a lot of this trend in our society.
Yeah, I often say, I think there are a lot of people in the world who are a couple of stiff drinks and a shot of loneliness away from being gay anyway.
Yeah, there's no question. There's no question.
That's the loudest voice inside of us.
Yeah.
Loneliness.
Exactly. And it doesn't have a whole lot to do with leaning feminine. It has a whole lot to do with there being no moral boundaries on sex. I mean, I don't mean to be too graphic here, but we know that truck drivers, many of them, just out of convenience, lean towards gay sex, even if they wouldn't describe themselves as gay. I'm not saying all truck drivers, obviously. I'm saying
of course.
In truck driver culture, this is a trend that just because they want to get satisfied, they're willing to have what would normally be, sex with another man or gay sex in essence, even though they don't consider themselves gay. They've just simply taken the moral boundaries off of sex. Well, as our society does that, as people increasingly consider themselves bi, as the goal is just to get satisfied, then you're exactly right. One shot of whiskey, one bad day, one firing, one willing male away from at least acting like they're gay if they're not actually in their souls gay.
Yeah.
And that's what's going on in our society.
Yeah. It seems that loneliness and that deep connection for loneliness, we will settle for almost anything that smells like, looks like, tastes like, might be, impersonates true intimacy on some level.
That's the lesson we're learning from prisons. That's the lesson we're learning from some parts of trucker culture. That's a lesson that we're learning from some parts of the military even.
Yeah.
Get a man lonely enough, get him isolated, get him with only other males as an opportunity for sexual fulfillment. And that has almost always arisen in history. And that, I mean, you know, as you probably know, in the Roman Empire, it was common for soldiers to have sex with each other. That was standard practice, and I don't mean to bend you on that too much, but that's what happened. That's what's happening in our society.
Well, in the book, The 12 Caesars, I mean, that's when it comes back to when people say, "Oh, it's so bad. The culture's so bad." It's like, have you read The 12 Caesars?
Yeah.
You know,
we're not there yet, but we're on that path. No question.
Yeah, no joke. Well, thank you for being willing to dive into some of that. I know some of that's pretty touchy. If we can take a slight turn when it comes to the Enneagram, what have you taken an assessment? Have you how far into it have you dove?
Not a lot for myself, but my wife is into it, so she has announced to me that I'm a 3. That's good. You know, she's described what that is and read it to me. That I'm a 3, and I believe she said I have a lean towards being a 9.
Okay.
And I don't think I let her finish telling me what a 9 was. I just assumed it was awesome. So I just assumed that I'm a 3, leaning towards just being freaking awesome. Yeah. And so anyway, though I'm a 3, and it did help me. What she described helped me a lot. But I'm certainly no expert on the Enneagram. One of my dear friends, Ian Cron, who's here in my hometown, is an expert on it. And when he talks to me, about it over Indian food, my eyes glaze over. But I think it's valuable stuff.
Well, I just sent in an email the other day asking him to be on the show so that I could talk about preaching through the lens of the Enneagram. But I haven't heard back from him. So if you see him, you tell him I really want to have this conversation with him.
I'll tell him to call it, brother. No question about it.
That'd be awesome. Well, Steve Mansfield, thank you so much for doing this. Levi, thank you for joining us on this as well. And I'll let you get back to your day. Thank you for your time. Thank you for what you're doing. And hopefully we can do this again sometime.
Levi, Jared, I look forward to it, guys. God bless. Bye-bye.
All right. Hey, we'll talk to you soon.